You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. I'm Bill Thomas.
And I'm Kristin Dilley.
This week we are joined by Alexis Murphy's great aunt, Trina. As the conversation unfolds, we just wanted to clarify a few things. Trina references a number of different solved and unsolved disappearances and homicides.
Two of the ones that you are very likely to have heard about are the names Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham. Both Morgan and Hannah were abducted and murdered by serial killer Jesse Matthew. Morgan disappeared in 2009 after attending a concert at the John Paul Jones Arena in Charlottesville, and Hannah Graham disappeared in 2014 after she was seen leaving a bar. Jesse Matthew walked up to her and apparently offered her a ride home. So you will be familiar with those two names.
Trina also references, of course, the murder of her niece, Alexis Murphy, in 2013. Randy Taylor, as discussed, was convicted of her murder. She also mentions Samantha Clarke, who disappeared in 2010. But Randy Taylor was among the last people to speak to her, and he is a suspect in her disappearance as well.
And finally, the last name that Trina mentions is one that may be unfamiliar to some of you, and that is the name Sage Smith. Sage Smith was a transgendered teenager who went missing from Charlottesville in 2012. Her disappearance and probable murder has not been solved. There is one person of interest in her case. There has as yet been no conclusion. Her body has not been found, and no one has been charged with her murder.
We hope you enjoy our discussion with Trina as much as we did.
Thanks for listening to Mind Over Murder.
Joining us today is Trina Murphy, who is Alexis Murphy's great aunt. Most times she seems to be referred to as her aunt, but the truth is she's actually great. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So if you don't mind, Trina, we just wanted to jump into some things. I've been a big admirer of yours for years, and as I was saying to you earlier, I've seen you on television and heard you on radio, and of course seen you quoted in newspapers, and I was sort of curious about something. How did the family develop the plan for you to be the spokesperson for your family when Alexis went missing? How did that come about?
I don't think there was a plan. I think it just came about, and really it was out of necessity. My niece, Angela, and I kind of tag teamed a lot of the interviews and broadcasts early on, but I don't think I remember there being a plan. It was basically her mom really didn't feel like she could handle speaking to the media, and under the circumstances, I'm sure everyone could understand that. In the beginning days, it's very taxing. You're trying to cope with all of this, the enormity of this situation, and you know that it's necessary to do absolutely every interview possible to get the word out to as many people as you can. And so, again, I don't think it was something that we had a conscious discussion about. It was just like, can you guys take care of this? And obviously, as family, I was willing to do whatever I could do to contribute to bringing her home or to bringing that closure to her mom and dad.
Well, it's funny. I remember thinking how strikingly polished you were when I first was following the case. Was this something you had done before?
It was not. I've never been one that had a problem with public speaking. If I'm passionate about something, it's very easy for me to speak about it. And again, I think it kind of fell into my lap, really. I didn't have time to rehearse it, but when something is this enormous, it becomes very easy to just kind of sit down and just be very truthful. And really that's that's the only thing you can do, because there's no way to dress this up or make it pretty, or it's just raw emotion. And I think, maybe that's a gift given to me, that I was just able to tap into that raw emotion, but be able to also express it in a way that people could receive it.
That's an extremely positive way to look at it, that you can look at this awful tragedy that had befallen your family and that you can take that bit of positive outlook on it. I certainly don't know that I would be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm also a nurse. So, Jill Harrington and I have talked about this a lot because she's a nurse as well. We're doers. We fix everything. There's something wrong, we fix it. And I think a lot of it comes from that as well, that, okay, this is what I can do to fix this situation at this moment. So you just get into go mode and you do what you have to do.
Again, it's an excellent use of your skills, and it's, excellent that you were able to come out of this with some sense of purpose. So ultimately, looking at it from a bit of distance at this point, how do you feel about the role that your family played or was allowed to play in the trial of Randy Taylor and then its aftermath?
Well, me personally, because I wasn't a witness that was going to testify, I got to sit through every moment of the trial. Her parents obviously testified. Other members of the family testified, so they had to be in and out of the courtroom at different times. But I wasn't in that position, so I was able to listen to all of the trial information and watch his demeanor and just really sit there as a witness to it all. There were obviously some very, very difficult moments that were revealed about, the physical findings on his property. Listening to, the FBI, one thing that distinctly stands out is she wore false fingernails, and there were a few of them found in his trailer. Yeah, the FBI brought in an expert to testify about how the fingernails were broken. So to disprove, to say, okay, well, she was just there and broke her fingernail, right? They described how the jagged edges helped them to determine that her fingernails were ripped off from some sort of struggle. So those types of details are what often strike me now. One, because it's fascinating that there's someone who's an expert in that, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And two, that, had we not had that level of detail, would we have had the same result? So I feel very fortunate, even though we did not get the closure, have not gotten the closure that we seek in finding, her remains. I think we had the best possible scenario for a positive outcome, I guess is the best way to say it. There was collaboration between all three law enforcement entities with Nelson County, the Virginia State Police, and the FBI. There was no, jockeying for position. Everybody just really was working together for the same end.
And had all three agencies been involved from the beginning because Alexis was a minor?
Well, she actually did not qualify for the, Amber Alert, because there are certain things that you have to qualify for that. But they were all three involved pretty much from day one, because the missing person report was filed on Sunday. The state police were involved Sunday evening at about, I'd say, around 3 o'clock. And by 7 o'clock, the first FBI agent was on the scene. I feel like from the very beginning, it was always a collaborative effort, so to speak.
There's always been some question about a potential link to the Samantha Clarke missing persons case. Did Samantha's name come up in the early going when Alexis was still a missing person?
Yes. Well, it came up. Samantha Clarke's name came up after Randy was arrested. To us, anyway, as a family, that's when we learned of it. Was after he was identified to us as a suspect, and law enforcement let us know of his, potential involvement in Samantha Clarke's disappearance as well.
Have you had any communication with her family at all? Have you spent time talking to them, or?
Samantha's family?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I just talked to her mother probably a week ago, and I went down. We had a conjoined search for both of them in Orange County, which is where Samantha was last seen. I met her mom. I've met her mom a few times, and we converse over social media. So yes, I try to stay in touch with her.
What's that dynamic like with the two of you, between yourself and Samantha's mom?
Well, I don't know that there is a dynamic. It's basically we share the same grief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I will see things that she posts about her daughter on Facebook. She'll post her picture or say something about how much she misses her, or and it's that collective grief that we probably in any other world, her and I would likely not have anything in common, but we shared this tragic event that's happened to both of us and our families, and it's a very solid bond.
It's funny. I've said the same thing about the other Colonial Parkway murders families. I hope this comes out right. I don't think our paths would have crossed had it not been for the fact that we're now all members of this, what is it John Walsh says, the club that no one wants to be invited to join.
Right. And I don't mean that in any negative way. I just, we live very different lives. We don't live, really in close proximity to each other. She's probably an hour from me. So I just don't know that we would have ever known each other.
Yeah, you wouldn't have run into each other at the grocery store living an hour
apart.
Exactly.
Right.
So you had mentioned Jill Harrington a little bit earlier. Can you talk a little bit about the Harringtons and their involvement? I know they were very supportive during the trial. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely. I haven't quite found words to describe Jill and Dan Harrington. I think for Jill, for me, she is just the epitome of grace. I have never met someone that just exemplifies decency the way she does. She was at the trial every single day.
Wow.
Every day. That's probably about an hour and a half drive for her from Roanoke to Nelson County. But she did not miss a day. She was there every day. The level of support from them is it's just indescribable, really.
I don't think I ever knew that I remember seeing the two of you on television together and at press conferences, but I don't think I realized until this moment that she came to court every single day.
She was there every day.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Do you stay in touch? I mean, is it the sort of thing where you do, or now that you've both kind of come to a different place, do you kind of put that relationship aside a little bit?
No, I don't think we have. We both live very busy lives, so we don't get to connect as often. But I just saw her a few months ago. I went to an art exhibit with Jane Vance, who co-wrote the book with Jill about Morgan's murder, and she did a huge art exhibit in Roanoke, and me and one of my friends drove up for that. We reach out to each other on holidays, anniversaries of our missing babies, and just, we just try to stay in touch as much as we can. I am a community outreach coordinator for Help Save the Next Girl, so, we communicate through that realm, but certainly, there really isn't anything that I feel separates this bond, right? Because even if I were to get a phone call today that Alexis was found, we've still gone through this journey together. And it's not much that can separate it, really.
Can you talk a little bit about Help Save the Next Girl, since I don't feel like that has gotten nearly enough publicity, and it is such an amazing organization. Talk to us a little bit about that, please.
Absolutely. So for those who may not know anything, Help Save the Next Girl was founded by Dan and Jill Harrington, parents of Morgan Harrington, who was abducted and murdered here in Charlottesville in 2009. This organization is grassroots, in someone's basement, grieving parents, trying to just make a difference and be the change that they want to see in the world, right? So through their grief, through all of what they've gone through, finding their daughter's killer after diligence, just traveling the state, showing the sketch, making sure that he was brought to justice. Unfortunately, he had the opportunity to kill one more time, but they literally took a killer off the street just through their diligence. And Help Save the Next Girl attacks this issue from every level, through education, where we go into schools and community and civic events and talk about situational awareness and, how to buddy up and how to take care of each other, especially to our young people. We've lobbied for new legislation, like the campus sexual assault bill, which was signed into a law here in the state of Virginia a few years ago. And just really and the support that they give to other families that are going through this. Because unfortunately, there's Hannah Graham and there's Nicole Lovell and there's Sage, here in Charlottesville, there's just so many families that need that, because there's no reference for this. As a nurse, I often have to have difficult conversations with families about end of life care. And there's a process for that, just like there's a process for someone, a baby being born, and there's a process for people transitioning to the next life. There's no process for the missing because there's no end, right? And even after there is an end, after the 101 days of Morgan being missing, I don't think you ever recover from that, so to speak. Like, that anguish of the not knowing becomes a part of your fiber.
We were speaking to this a little bit earlier, just Bill and I. Two of the Colonial Parkway murders families have loved ones who have never been recovered. And that is so much a different type of grief. I cannot imagine what you all go through, but I think it's amazing that you have developed this resource to help anybody who may be having to deal with this, intense trauma. I really can't commend you enough for that.
Thank you. And again, I think it's necessary for those of us who can, because I do realize that not everyone can, right? But those of us who can support those other families and affect that kind of change, we really have an obligation to do so, because no one understands this unless you've lived it.
It's funny, you've sadly now added something to your skill set, your life skill set that is incredibly unique. Because, look, I've spoken to, scores of law enforcement officers and forensics experts and all of these folks, and I find them all amazing and inspirational, and I learn a lot. But it's very rare that you meet someone who's actually lost a loved one in this way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's funny. I told Kristin a story 10 years ago when the FBI brought us in when the Colonial Parkway murders case heated up after the FBI lost control of the crime scene photos. I remember we were flown in from around the country by the FBI and then briefed on the case, and we spent 2 nights in Newport News. And I remember after a 5-hour briefing, we were driving back to Annapolis, Maryland, where my older brother lives. My dad, who's since passed away, I remember him leaning forward in the car and saying very quietly to my brother and I as we drove along, "At least we know what happened to Kathy." In other words, there's no question that, she's gone, and we know the circumstances, as unfortunate as they were. I actually think, if it's possible, having a loved one go missing like this, it can be even more difficult because there's even more of an element of not knowing.
Oh, absolutely. And I will sit here and tell you, we're going into our 7th year. After sitting through the trial and listening to all the evidence, and my clinical brain tells me in all fashion that something very bad, very tragic and fatal happened to Alexis. The other side of my brain still wonders, right? Every time there is a sex offender ring busted or someone's found or whatever it may be, that little tinge of hope still jumps up in my chest. And I don't think without her being recovered, I don't think that will ever go away.
No, I completely understand.
And that's part of the continued torture, right? That's the piece that we have to live with day in and day out. And, it's just nothing fixes that.
What advice would you offer to another family that might be going through a situation like this? Do you have any general thoughts if someone were to face this kind of situation?
Yeah, I think, just through trial and error, we have to learn something from these tragedies, and so that we can, do it better. And again, I think that goes back to legislating for new laws and better search and rescue and that type of thing. But to family members, I would say that you need to figure out who's going to manage this for you, right? Because chances are the parents are very overwhelmed. And I do think it needs someone to manage it, because the media is going to become your friend. no matter how you look at it, upside or down, we were fortunate that we didn't have a lot of negative interactions. I can only really think of one possibly with the media, but we had to embrace them because they don't just show up at your house and say, hey, we want to cover your missing person story, because there's a lot of missing people, right? You've got to really work at that, and you've got to work at continuing to get the story out there, whether it be social media, flyers. I remember going through stages where we were just printing flyers and putting them out everywhere, and we were calling everybody, and people were sharing it on social media. And all of this happens like very quickly because your world stops spinning. It's like time literally stops, the first, I would say, week of someone being missing. It just stops. You're just numb. You don't know whether you're coming or going, and all of this stuff is coming at you very quickly. And you're trying to devise a plan for what to do next. And even the logistics of it, like, when do I file a missing persons report? How do I get my loved one's story out there? So organizations like Help Save the Next Girl are a huge piece of that, because once a missing persons report is filed, you reach out to someone involved with the organization, and we get your loved one's picture and poster up on our website, which goes out to hundreds of thousands of people. And then those hundreds of thousands of people share it with more people, right? So I think the logistics of it is a huge piece that I would share with other families, is make sure that someone is figuring out what resources to tap into.
The world has changed tremendously in terms of the ability to do kind of community outreach and involve people. I think that's pivotal. Just a quick logistical question for you. Did you take time off from work? I mean, I know you're a nurse manager and you're the boss and you have got a full-time professional position. How did you work that out?
So I actually took 2 weeks off. I was working, just answering emails and that type of thing, responding to the fires that I like to call them. But I didn't physically go into the building for about 2 weeks. And then I went back to work and, worked as much as I could. And I had been with the company I was working for then for 7.5 years. But as a manager, you have to be committed to your team. And before the trial, I did end up resigning from my position because I needed to focus on that. And I didn't feel like I could give 100% to both. And I went back and just started doing floor nursing because I could control my schedule. And the only person I had to be responsible for was me. That's one of those things that people, don't look at. Like, this fundamentally changes your life because, again, you quickly have to decide a lot of major life moves based on this one event. But for me, it was an easy decision because I knew what I had to do. And fortunately, I was in a career that allowed me that flexibility and realized that everyone doesn't have that, right? So I feel very fortunate that that was the case for me. And then after the trial, I actually went to work back as a manager in a nonprofit, and just recently, in April of 2018, returned to the company that I was working for prior.
Oh, so things kind of went full circle in that regard.
They did, yeah.
They were probably
While I was away for 4 years, I ended up getting my administrator's license, and I was a director of nursing for them for 7.5 years, and went back as an executive director. So it worked out. But
wow, you're now you're the big cheese.
You know what? I'm just a part of my team because I can't do my job without them. So I have no desire to be the big anything.
Gracious as always.
Do it without them, so there's no point in me. I believe in servant leadership. So,
if I can shift you over to the trial for just 1 second, I do have a couple of questions. But first of all, just logistically, how long did the trial take? How much time did you have to devote to it?
6 days.
Okay.
It was 6 days, and visiting with people and law enforcement and all of that prior to, but, just getting debriefed and that kind of thing and doing press conferences before and after and all of that. But the actual trial left.
Now, I do know that Randy Taylor's lawyers did attempt to negotiate a reduced sentence for him in exchange for information about Alexis's whereabouts. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it was the day of sentencing. They decided to throw out that for a 20-year sentence, he would tell what the exact words were. He would tell us what we wanted to know.
That's how they that's how they worded it.
That's how they worded it, right? So that's no definitive statement to me, right? Because
Right.
I want to know a whole lot of things. But the decision was made that, okay, 20 years, I think he was in his early 50s maybe. 20 years, you only serve 85% in the state of Virginia. So he gets out and he's still young enough that he could reoffend. And I can live with what I'm living with now. What I could not live with is having to look at the face of another mom, aunt, sister, community member, loved one of the person that he reoffended because we wanted something and he got out of jail early. I couldn't live with that.
The decision then to turn that down, whose call was that?
Ultimately, her parents. But people ask me that all the time, and I really don't remember there being a lot of discussion about it. It was kind of like, this is what we're offering, and it was pretty much like, no.
So it wasn't like you sat down for hours
no.
At home talking about what do we want to do here? They said no.
I think there was just a collective feeling that he needed to go to prison forever. And that is what we walked in there seeking, and that's what we walked out of there with. And I don't think anything else would have been okay.
Do you think that he ever will eventually give up the location of where Alexis currently is?
I hope so. I don't hold a lot of faith in him. He's a true narcissist. He loves the attention that this gets him. And, it makes him feel like he's won because he's holding that information.
He's got a sense of power.
Yeah.
Probably.
And that's really what these crimes are about anyway, right?
Yeah.
We all know that sexual assault crimes and crimes like this are about having power over someone else. And I'm sure he sits there every day thinking that, he holds the cards to our happiness. But we've all managed to pick up the pieces and go on with our lives. And as far as I'm concerned, it's still, him being free is still not worth that information.
It's funny. I had not thought of that, your point, that shortening his sentence could lead to him reoffending. It's an interesting and kind of nuanced point that you're making about not, chopping off perhaps years of his sentence in exchange for something that's obviously very important to you and your family.
Mm-hmm. It's just not, it's not, sometimes you have to think of the greater good and not what you need in the immediate moment.
Have there ever been any opportunity to speak to him directly in terms of you or other family members?
There haven't been. It's something that a few of us have sought out. I think there's a strategic plan that I can't really speak to with regards to, continuing to interview him and kind of see maybe if he's going to do something with regards to revealing her whereabouts. But I do hope that someday that comes to fruition where I can sit across the table from him and have a conversation with him.
Yeah, to your point, I do think that here's a situation where he has become increasingly powerless because of his trial and sentencing and incarceration. He probably feels like he has a limited amount of power left, and somehow this bargaining chip, I hope that doesn't sound callous,
no,
but that's how he might think of it.
Mm-hmm. That's what it is. He knows he's never getting out. But I'm sure, just like I hope one day I find Alexis or we find Alexis, and I hope that one day when one of these things pop, that little bit of hope that I talked about that jumps up in my chest, I'm sure he has that same hope with the power that he holds about her whereabouts. He hopes that one day we'll crack and just say, okay, let's rework this deal and you tell us where she is. Don't bet on it, Rand.
Yeah, I don't think so. A gut level response that no, that's not something we'd be interested in, and it doesn't sound like you would waver from that position.
And the timing was key as well. You let us sit through this 6-day trial, through all this anguish, to listening to all these details, and then you want to put a deal on the table. It's like, nah. As my grandfather used to say, you're day late and a dollar short.
It's true.
What are your biggest frustrations about this case as a whole?
That it ever was needed, that it was even something that happened, and that we've never found her. But as far as how the case was handled by law enforcement and our community and everyone involved, I have no frustrations about that. I think that again, was a concerted 1,000% effort from every agency involved. Mark Edgeman, who is the Director of Emergency Management for the state of Virginia, we still talk to each other regularly. There's still searches that occur. I can't have any frustration about that piece of it. And I know that that's not the norm for a lot of people. Law enforcement gets a lot of criticism for how they handle these cases. Maybe there's always room for improvement, right? But I don't know how you start looking for somebody that just disappears off the face of the earth. Mark made a comment one day and he was like, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Someone had made that comment and he said, well, first you have to find the haystack.
Yeah, and then look in the right one.
Exactly. I mean, this where we live is just, it's rural and there's just nothing but woods and streams and trees and abandoned houses and cars and mountainsides. And there's a lot of places to hide a body.
Yeah, a lot of gorgeous country there. And you're right. You wouldn't even know where to start. No. Obviously, if searches are being conducted, sometimes there are thoughts about here's a place where we might consider looking.
Right. And that's all, it's just a crapshoot, really. It's like, I'm sure, well, it's not a crapshoot because they look at the evidence and they'll say, okay, this is a likely place that we should look. But there's no guarantee, obviously. I was very close with Sage's grandmother before her passing. And I think her case is really even more puzzling and difficult because she was in the city of Charlottesville and was seen on Main Street and then just was never seen again with no physical evidence whatsoever. Again, where do you start? I don't know. It's just, I'm just thankful that wasn't our reality. We just got, I don't want to say lucky. I think we strategically just got a fabulous team of investigators.
The search for Alexis and the case actually came together fairly quickly.
It did. Like I said, missing persons report Sunday morning, all the teams in place Sunday evening, FBI command center set up Monday morning. One of the things when you asked me about advice to families, something that I left out of that was that people need to know that you can invite the FBI to come. They have to be invited either by family or law enforcement. They will not just come unless they are invited to. And that's something that I think families need to be aware of, that you can pick up the phone and say, this is the situation, will you come help?
I don't think I knew that. That's good information to know.
Mm-hmm. My niece just happened to know someone. She used to babysit for an FBI agent, and she called him, and that's how, it was just that simple thing. So that's one of the things that we've learned in the course of our journey is that, they can be invited to come in. And fortunately for us, they were there very early on. So I think if there was a team put together that could find somebody that was missing, it was the one that we had, and we still didn't get the result that we wanted. That tells you how difficult these cases are to solve.
Was there any feedback? How did Nelson County and Virginia State Police feel about the FBI being brought in?
Again, it was collaborative. There were no feelings. Like when we did press conferences, it was the sheriff's department would go first, the state police would go second, the FBI would go last, or whatever order it went in. There was no jockeying for, this is my case. I think Nelson County realized very early on that, it's a small community, right? And we have a small police force. Like, they don't have the resources that the state police have, and they don't have the resource, and the state police don't have the resources that the FBI has. Putting all three of those together is the best case scenario.
Sure. And I think in a missing persons case like this, when, as you were saying, time is of the essence, they'd be crazy to turn down assistance.
Absolutely.
And as you were saying, at trial, I didn't know there'd be a person that could testify about fingernails, which became essential
there was
in
a
this
person
particular
to testify,
example.
Yeah, about fingernails, about her eyelashes, about her phone. There was an expert who could actually tell, once they determined the last cell phone tower that her phone pinged off of, the towers have sides, A, B, and C. He could narrow it down to which side it pinged off of. Like,
oh, wow.
The level of detail in the investigative piece of it is fascinating to me.
And I think these issues came up in the Morgan Harrington, Hannah Graham cases as well. The tracking the movement of a perpetrator, a potential perpetrator via cell phone pings. And, most of us, I just came back from driving to the grocery store. Most of us aren't thinking about the fact that our whereabouts are being tracked more or less by our phones, but that is how the thing works. Most of us don't think about it very much.
Well, I don't. I know that I didn't prior to this, but now I do, and I have to have my phone with me 24/7 for work anyway. I do know that I'm conscious of not leaving my phone, even if I go into a store. Like, unfortunately, this is kind of one of the things that something like this does to you. You're hyper conscious about your surroundings, your awareness. Like 7 years later, that if anything, that's gotten worse, not better. Like, I'm always paying attention to who's around me, what's going on around me. My dad was a Vietnam vet, and so I was always taught not to sit with my back to doors. And every now and then I would do it. Now I never do it. Like, I will make somebody switch seats with me so that I can see who's coming in and out of a door. If I go into a new place, I'm scoping it to see where the exits are and who's coming, who's around me. I just hyper pay attention to stuff like that now.
I'll have to confess that I do the same thing. Maybe we all
because
should.
You have to understand, like, my niece was abducted in broad open daylight from a town where everyone knows everyone. And if you don't know that person, you know somebody that person's related to. If it can happen there, it can literally happen anywhere. And it doesn't matter. This is one of those things, it's like cancer. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care how old you are, how young you are, what your educational status is, your financial status, the color of your skin. Abductors don't care. This could happen to anybody.
No, it's true. And when you talk about, when you speak at to schools or groups of young people and that sort of thing, this idea of situational awareness is so critical. A certain percentage of that would probably benefit all of us.
Oh, sure. I mean, I can't tell you how many people. I was just traveling for work the other day, and I walked down to a hotel lobby, and there was like 6 people sitting in the lobby, and all of them were on a device. I could have walked off the elevator, and they all would have been dead before they even knew I was there. And I think about things like that. When I'm in situations, I'm looking at these people, and I'm going, they have no clue what's going on around them. No clue. Their faces in a device, and I see people walking across the street. I get it. Like, we live in a technology-based world, but it's like an invite for predators to say, because don't think for a minute that Randy Taylor woke up that morning, or Jesse Matthews for that matter. I think Jesse was more of a situational killer, so to speak. He was an opportunity killer. I think that Randy was a thoughtful killer in that he sought out his prey. This isn't the first time that he encountered Alexis or that he saw her. He admitted to following her. He knew where she worked. He had been seen when the truck came out. Everybody, admittedly said, I've seen the truck on the road, where her house is. Like, he was tracking her.
And I remember I don't know if it was at trial, but I remember seeing media reports that even people at the gas station knew him as a guy that would sit there in this very distinctively decorated truck, watching, pretty girls. And, the truth is,
but that's not a crime.
No. And, they called it girl watching when I was a kid. I don't know if that's still politically correct. But
it's probably politically correct unless you're a predator, and then it's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And watching an attractive person walk by, as you said, is not a crime.
Well, that's human nature. We all do that,
Sure.
I mean, and I always say about Alexis that she was not just saying this because my niece, I'm saying it because it's true. She was strikingly beautiful.
Oh,
she was one of these people that could walk to a room, and even other women would have to look up and say, "Oh my God, she is gorgeous."
She was beautiful, absolutely.
And that's that. Unfortunately, that's a double-edged sword. It gets you wanted attention, and it gets you unwanted attention. But again, I don't know that she was growing up in Nelson County, and that's just not something that's on the radar. People sit at stores all the time here. It's just kind of a thing. I don't know why, but it is. But yeah, the workers at the Liberty gas station at the time were like, he would sit there and watch, and he'd sit at the Food Lion, but she went to that gas station every single day.
Well, and if that's your only place to hang out as a teenager, if there's only so many locations where you can go to hang out with your friends and whatever else, I imagine that probably most teenagers in town would have been there.
Yeah, she really didn't go there to hang out with her friends. She would go there to get caramel frappes every day and gas. Because Alexis really, she had lots and lots of friends on social media, but she only had a few close friends that she really hung out with, and most of the time they were at her house or she was at theirs. She really wasn't someone that went out to parties or to social events, she just didn't do that. But she did have a lot of associates and a lot of friends. And I know a lot of her classmates said that, Alexis was the kind of girl who, she was friendly to everyone, the popular kids and the not so popular kids. She was just kind to everyone. That's a double-edged sword.
Would you say she had a trusting nature? And, we watched this video of their encounter that day, and then it appears they left together in two separate vehicles. Do you think that's a case of small?
Well, first of all, I don't think that she left with him in two separate vehicles.
Okay.
In my humble opinion.
Oh, sure.
And since I'm the one speaking, it's my opinion, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my humble opinion, at that time, another little unknown fact, the surveillance cameras did not shoot to pump 8 and 9. Alexis was at pump 9 facing the highway. Randy's truck was at pump 8 facing the store. So his truck was literally blocking her car.
Oh, got it.
Now, I know there has been no evidence that anyone else is involved, but I've said this before and I'll say it again, and I'll go to my grave believing that someone was assisting him, got out of his truck and into the backseat of her car, because there was no reason, there was no exchange. He held the door open for her and she walked in the store. That was it. There wasn't any conversation. There wasn't any.
Oh, thank you for clarifying. I didn't know that.
Back and forth. He held the door open for her. She walked in the store, got what she needed, and left. He made up this story about her coming to his house to buy marijuana.
That's part of his cover story, not necessarily reality.
Absolutely, because the last thing that she texted was bird down, which is a lynch bird from Nelson County, which is south. So there was no reason for her to go north. And in full transparency, Alexis, a lot of her family members, she could have gotten marijuana from anybody. She didn't need to get it from someone like Randy Taylor.
Some creep who hangs out. Who hangs out at the convenience store.
Right, and I know my niece. She would never have voluntarily went anywhere with anybody that looked like Randy Taylor.
Does the movement of Alexis' father's car, in other words, the car that she borrowed that day to go shopping, that always made me think there has to be a second person as well. Am I on the right track there?
I don't know with regards to that, because the timeline for that was that he, and this is part of what sealed his own deal in trial, he went to Charlottesville, dropped off the car. You can see a figure getting out of the car, but the video is very grainy, so you can't tell who it is. Mm-hmm. But he ended up at an Applebee's, within walking distance, running distance of this, where the car was parked.
Right, which is sort of near a movie theater and that sort of thing.
Right, correct. But Alexis knew nothing about Charlottesville. She had just started working there 2 weeks before she was abducted. And the first week, her parents had to drive her back and forth so she could figure out how to get from her house to Charlottesville. People that lived there just went to Lynchburg. They didn't frequent Charlottesville.
Right. So she didn't drive in the wrong direction up to Charlottesville with the car. That's Randy Taylor, more than likely.
That's Randy Taylor in the car at that point. Because at that point, from what we've seen in evidence, he had already done what he needed to do to her. So he dropped the car off, ended up at this Applebee's where he claimed that he was there with a friend who was passed out in the car, and he didn't have a way to get home, and the bartender called this cab driver who took him all the way to Nelson. But the cab driver testified that he looked in the car, that he was supposedly there with this person, and there was no one in there.
Could you hear me rolling my eyes over the phone? Because this story just doesn't wash.
Oh, no. I mean, okay. I don't know how he got so good at disposing of bodies, but as far as disposing of evidence, he's clueless.
Yeah, one could say. It would appear then that he has an accomplice, an unnamed accomplice at this point, as far as we know, because somebody had to help him. One person can't drive there, drop off Alexis' dad's vehicle.
Oh, he could have done that part.
But then he's got to get back. He's got to get back home, which
he came back in a cab.
I was never sure if that was a fact or not.
Yeah, he came back in the cab, and the cab driver, was trying to make a little extra cash. He'll never do that again, I'm sure, because he ended up testifying in a first-degree murder trial because he tried to make a little extra money.
That would have been a pretty expensive fare, I would imagine. We're talking about 30-something miles, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, right. And, he charged him like $50, I think, to bring him out here. Yeah, but again, it cost him a whole lot more because poor guy. If I felt bad for anybody other than us, it was him because he was terrified. He was just like, how in the world did I even get involved in this?
And this guy's just the cab driver who's in the wrong place at the wrong time, as
He
far
was
as we
actually
know.
friends with the bartender at the Applebee's, and the bartender called him, was like, hey, this dude needs to get back to Nelson. He's in a situation. You want to make a quick buck and take him back. And that's just how it happened.
Talk to our listeners a little bit about the best things that you would like for our listeners to know about Alexis. Paint a picture of her for us.
Typical teenager. Typical in a lot of ways, untypical in a lot of ways, in that, again, given her striking beauty and, her popularity, she was still kind to people that may not have fell into her social group. Athletic, outgoing, but also a bit of a recluse. She liked her private time. She didn't really share a lot of her personal self. She had a very few select, really close friends that I think she, probably shared her life with. Charismatic, funny, loved her family, loved to dance, loved makeup and anything to do with her hair. She learned how to do her own hair extensions, and she was always changing her hair. And, she loved to laugh. She was, silly at times, and we would refer to her having blonde moments. I told a story that people heard where we were watching a race on TV, and the moon was really big that night, and they kept showing it at, on the race. And she was like, oh my God, that is so pretty. I wonder if they see the same moon we do. And like, there was like this silent pause and then just an uproar of laughter. And then she realized what she had said, and she was like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. Yeah, just, I think Alexis could have been anybody's daughter. She could have been anybody's niece. She could have been anyone's sister, granddaughter. She was just a really vibrant person with a lot to give the world. And I think this far out, I grieve what could have been more than I grieve what was.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to close this conversation on. And I have to say, your characterization of her, we were both just grinning because she just sounds like the most amazing person, and it's such a loss for all of us.
It is. It's a loss for humanity. It's a deep loss for us, but it's a loss for humanity because I really know that she was going to, she already did, but she was going to contribute something to the world, as all of these young girls and guys are, right? Like, they're snatching these wonderful souls in their infancy, and they haven't had a chance to give all of that positive to the world. And therefore, humanity suffers. Hopefully one day we won't have to have these conversations.
I hope so too. We can't thank you enough, Trina, for taking the time and for making us both smile thinking about your niece and what a wonderful person she was. And that's a great way to remember her.
Well, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate you guys doing this and keeping these cases out in the forefront. And, Bill, even through your own personal grief, you're much like me in that way. So thank you for that.
And Trina, thank you so much for doing the outreach that you are continuing to do with Help Save the Next Girl. That is just so vitally important. And, I just can't commend you enough for that. You're doing an amazing job.
Thank you. Thank you. I say it all the time. It's very cliche, but we have to live by being the change we want to see. You got to get up and do something.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mind Over Murder. You can listen to Mind Over Murder on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And a reminder that we're a new podcast, and we very much appreciate your subscriptions and your kind comments and reviews.
Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Sources used in this week's episode of Mind Over Murder include
reporting from ABC News, CBS News, Collegiate Times, the Fredericksburg Star, Medium.com, NBC News, the New York Daily News, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the Daily Progress, The Hook, the News and Advance.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.